Alrighty, hello guys. It's gonna be a very quick video. Well, I hope it's quick because I am doing this after work and I'm tired as all hell, so I do apologize in advance. If I am going to do this very impromptu, I'm going to be very rough. Do apologize, but as you guys may know, today there was a new PV that released on the Wuthering Waves channel, and this dropped a crap ton of attention because it revealed a lot of stuff about Mengzhou and the Mengzhou characters. So of course today we're going to be going through it. Prepared a bit of analysis for you guys, so hopefully you guys enjoy it. So first things first, one of the first observations we want to make is that in the beginning of the PV, it said that there was Shuangfeng Hold, right? And Shuangfeng Hold is one of the places that we have seen before. As I said, kind of like in my previous videos, I heavily suspected that this was based on Shuangfeng, which I was right, because this is just Shuangfeng Hold, and this is basically not Mengzhou, right? So Shuangfeng is on the road to Mengzhou, but it isn't Mengzhou. So it's connected to the main city, but it's not the main city. Okay, so the other thing is that one thing we saw a lot of in this trailer is that there were a lot of like these automata robots, right? It's kind of like almost steampunk aesthetic. And this actually makes a lot of sense because within Buling's story, we got to know that Mengzhou was very well known for automata mechanics, and that was actually under the direction of the Sentinel Sin, which it's very nice that we got a lot of confirmation of that. So, of course, you guys are obviously here to hear me talk about the characters, not yap about Mengzhou, because we did that in the previous video a little bit. So, I won't disappoint you guys. Let's just get straight to it, okay? So, first things first, one of the things we're going to be doing in this video is that we are going to be heavily looking at the Chinese versions of the names of the characters, because the English versions are, of course, translations that may not be fully accurate. One of the things about Chinese as a language is that one Romanized word can represent, for example, many different Chinese words, because Chinese words oftentimes are very context-based and sound the same. So you have Yangyang, Shuangling, Suisui, Suoming, Qingran, Qingshao, and Xin. So we're going to be going through them one by one, and it's going to be rough details, so make sure you guys are hanging on. So first things first, we have Yangyang, Shuangling. So Yangyang is actually based on yang, which is, it is not lamb, but actually means sprouts or seedlings. And Xuanling is basically two words combined, where you have Xuan, which means, it kind of means like dark and mysterious, right? And Ling is a kind of long, pretty like feather, which is oftentimes used as an ornament. So for example, one of the things you can kind of see is at the end of Yang sword here, there's like a feather tied to the end of it, like a tassel. That would be actually considered a ling, right? So a lot of, for example, the feathers attached as ornaments, jewelry, or even used as like arrowheads are often considered ling because they will be long and ornamental. So one of the couple of observations we can make here is that not only is Yangyang attached to Jinzhou, not Mengzhou, right? Which is pretty interesting because we're in the Mengzhou region. She's also most likely Suisui's sister because of the tacit mark location and also other things we're going to talk about, right? One of the things I want to talk about is that Yangyang's sister was already revealed in her story, and Yangyang actually probably comes from a rather rich family because when she was 11 years old, I think her family was like killed by bandits or something, and it was mentioned that she was dressed in fine clothes as a child. And one of the things we're going to talk about is that Yangyang's sister, Suisui, actually works for Mingting. So they're probably from a pretty well-off lineage, if you know what I mean, right? But with that out of the way, some cultural inspirations, right? I do think that Yangyang, especially within this PV and also within this form of herself, is very heavily associated with cranes because in Chinese culture, if we're going off of the bird hierarchy, the crane is the second most powerful bird behind the fenghuang. And the fenghuang has already been taken because if you want to watch my Changli video, I'll talk all about this, but Changli is basically the resonator that symbolizes the fenghuang. And what's really interesting about the crane in Chinese culture is that there are four types of cranes. And like basically four colors. I think it was like yellow, black, blue, and I think it was green. I'm not too sure. Dude, like I'm like kind of washed when it comes to my Chinese culture, okay? But the really interesting thing about these four colors is that a crane would change colors and thus change forms the older that it got. And the black crane would be like the oldest of these cranes. So I think actually here that Yangyang is probably one of the, it's like a yellow crane. And I'll talk about why later because Spoiler alert, her sister's a blue crane. But basically the blue or yellow crane are kind of like younger, but one of the things we're going to see a lot is that Yangyang is younger than her sister, right? Especially because you see young means sprouts or seedlings, right? And we're going to talk about that later, of course, but as always, cranes, they symbolize wisdom, nobility, and longevity. And the other thing that we're going to talk about is you can see here, wind breaths send a lark. Let me bloody read it, sorry. Wind breaths send a lark song far. That's actually being translated here. And one of the things in the second line is going to be talked about, which I found rather interesting, is tangling. And tang is a color within Chinese that is a deep azure that is seen to symbolize the color of the sky. And ling are basically the feathers, the ornamental feathers that we talked about before. So kind of like the word over here. So tangling basically is this kind of like azure blue feather. And that kind of like makes a lot of sense considering the color scheme of Yangyang, especially seeing the feather over here. But the other thing as well is that since I've never made a Yangyang video, so I never talked about this, one of the things I need to talk about with Yangyang and why she seems to always message you and kind of almost stalk you in this regard is because she can listen to the wind, right? And that's actually because in Chinese culture, wind is seen as the ultimate, like almost divine carrier or traveler of messages. So that's kind of like explains why Yangyang's abilities are so attuned with wind and how she can always hear you and basically send you mail because she is like it's like the divine element of messaging. Take it that way, right? Okay, so anyway, next we're going to talk about Suisui, which is going to be Yangyang's sister. First off, we need to break down Suisui's name, right? So Sui actually is a word that refers to an ear or kernel of grain. So for example, you have something like yumisui, and yumisui basically means a kernel or ear of corn, for example. And the interesting thing about Sui, because I kind of like, there's a reason why her name is Sui, but I also saw that Sui is a word that you can kind of use to describe a shape of jewelry or a tassel, right? Especially because Suisui uses a lot of tassels on design, like, hairpin, throughout kind of like the rest of her body and stuff like that, has tons of like tassels all around. That may be a reference to Sui, but the reason why she is Sui is because, as we said before, Yangyang is the word yang means sprout, right? And sui means kernel or like grain. So it very definitively shows that Suisui is the older sibling in this relationship, basically. And besides that, going past her name, we already know she's most likely Yangyang's sister with this tacit marks in the same place. The name even matches. So kind of like, I don't know, their parents had a little bit of fun naming their daughters, basically. And Yangyang also mentions that she has a sister in her fourth story. So you can kind of see here, feathers dance in the air, carrying Yangyang and a child, a gentle yet powerful wind. The child looked around the floating feathers and asked, "Are you the lark fairy that flies in the wind, big sister?" So, yes, Yangyang has a big sister. This is her big sister, right? So anyhow, one thing that we are going to be talking about a lot is that in the previous slide with Yangyang, we talked about how she refers a lot to possibly cranes. And I think that's basically confirmed within Suisui's outfit, because you can kind of see here, she even has a pin or a badge emblazoned with a blue crane, right? And the blue crane is a bit older than the yellow crane. You can kind of see that in her hairpin, in her badge. And basically, again, very similar to Yang and Sui, she is the older sibling, right? The other thing, of course, that is very prominent about her design is the fact that she uses a fan, right? And one of the things we're going to talk about later, because we're also going to talk about the reveal of the combat of Yangyang and Suisui, is that fans are very symbolic in Chinese culture, to say the least, right? Because Chinese fans are not just kind of like things you use to like fan yourself or cool yourself, they're actually almost status symbols, right? Because a fan, while like, for example, for a soldier or a warrior, the weapon of choice is a sword, for a scholar, or for example, like, a strategist, this weapon of choice is the folding fan. The fan conceals one's face and also symbolizes that one has a sharp mind, because when you conceal your face behind a fan, it kind of like shows that you're keeping like your secrets or your tactics hidden, right? And if you ever watch Chinese dramas, you'll probably know exactly what I'm talking about. So many characters like hiding their faces behind fans, right? Because, it is it's like shows that you're strategic, shows that you're taciturn, etc. And all of this makes so much sense because unlike any of the other characters on the roster, Suisui is actually based in Mingting, right? Which is the capital. So it makes sense that she's kind of like this administrator, very similar to Changli, right? That came from Mingting to perhaps oversee one of the provinces of Mengzhou or something, right? Besides that, in her quote, you can actually also see fan unfolds, dawn of truth draws near, which is the Chinese here. And you can kind of see that dawn is really interesting because Suisui's quote aligns dawn with truth. And dawn in Chinese culture, alongside a lot of like other elements like fire, like represents kind of like light and clarity. So the dawn of truth is actually really meaning that she tries to find kind of like the truth in things, basically. It's basically two very parallel concepts of symbolism put together, okay? Let's go on to the next character. Next character is going to be Suo Ming. So Suo, just going through her name first off, Suo is a word that is both a noun and verb in Chinese that basically means to lock or imprison. So for example, if you say, 记得锁门, that means remember to lock the door, right? So it's both a noun and a verb, and so the first word of her name is really self-explanatory, but the next word, Ming, is really interesting because it kind of means like darkness or twilight or nightfall. Like you kind of get the gist of it, right? So when you combine everything together, her name basically means like locking away the darkness or chaining the twilight or something. And I actually have a reason. I think I have kind of like a clue as to why that is, but I'll talk about that later because we're first going to talk about her kind of like quote or like whatever, like a poem, right? Locked in the past, the prisoner lingers long, right? And that's also written in Chinese over here, as always. So in the quote, one of the words I found very interesting is the word 是, and 是 is a kind of seal or like almost legal contract kind of thing that is a basically kind of like prisoner sentence or legally binding agreement. And a lot of like 是 are basically shown within, for example, fu tallies, right? And fu tallies are kind of like these things they're seeing in the picture over here, where there's like two halves and basically a prisoner and like an administrator keep one half, and it's only with the consent of two people that any agreement can take place, right? So basically a legal contract. And one of the things that's really interesting is that Suo Ming has tons and tons of lock and key motifs all over the design. You can just see the picture collage I made here. And what that probably means that she's either kind of like a guard or a gatekeeper or warden or a prisoner, and even metaphorically, I kind of imagine that maybe she's like fulfilling a past promise. So she's a prisoner to the past or something. It's a much more metaphorical understanding. But my current theory actually is that I think that she might actually be the gatekeeper or the prison warden of a prison of TDs, right? Because one of the things a lot of people are noticed but didn't really understand is that so much of her PV doesn't just focus on locks and keys, but also paper umbrellas. And paper umbrellas in Chinese culture are not just really something that you would use to kind of like shield yourself from the rain. Spiritually, it also protects you from evil spirits, right? Within like a lot of like Taoist and kind of like even Confucian kind of beliefs, it protects you from evil spirits. So as soon as I saw that, especially because you see like the cascade of umbrellas and like this evil lightning and stuff like that, right? And lightning in Chinese culture as well is a divine force that destroys evil spirits. So evil spirits, what are evil spirits in Wuthering Waves? TDs, right? Tacit discords. And especially in Buling's story, because she's from Mengzhou, I'm getting a lot of information from Buling. In Buling's first story, she even says that she went to exorcise TDs with her master, and her master called these TDs ghosts or evil spirits. So maybe, for example, Suo Ming, like locking away the darkness, literally means she's like a gatekeeper in a prison of TDs, or she contains TDs or something, right? She locks away tacit discourse or something. That's my guess. So yeah, that's Suoming. Next one we have Jingran. Jingran is the most confusing one for me because I kind of don't know what a lot of his name and like his like line of poetry over here really mean, but I try my best. Okay, so Jing means scenery. So for example, Jing is usually a word like a suffix or that you would use in conjunction with another Chinese word. So for example, you have Fengjing, and that's basically means like kind of like a beautiful landscape or something, right? So Jing doesn't really make sense to me because I just don't see where scenery fits in with his character at the moment. The second word, run, means to burn, right? It's not a very common word actually in terms of burn, because usually if you want to say you want to burn something, you would say like so run usually is kind of like actually not a verb, but like almost a adverb or like a adjective. It's really hard to describe, right? And in modern terms, run is even kind of like used to say like something is hype, right? Like it's like the like this is like hot shit, you know? So yeah, that's run. So Jing run basically kind of like means burning scene, but like I have no idea what that means. So if anyone that is Chinese wants to enlighten me, you're more than free to do so. But my current theory so far outside of his name, right? I really do think that Jingran is part of the ISA. So the ISA, if you guys didn't know, were first introduced in the Choyun trailer, right? And in Choyun's story, the ISA, which she was a part of, are basically this kind of secret police that can completely ignore the laws of Huanglong in order to execute the will of the emperor. And the ISA was super obviously based on a real secret police in the Qing dynasty called the Jingyi Wei. And the Jingyi Wei is basically the embroidered uniform guard, right? So you kind of see like their embroidered black and gold uniforms. That was the uniform of the Jingyi Wei. And Jingran seems to also be based on it. Like we can kind of see there's like gold and black parts of his uniform already. Or maybe like Furyun, he's like ex-ISA, right? Because he seems very ISA-esque, right? But then you can kind of see like he has like these flaming lanterns, like he's kind of like all these like kind of like lions, which seem like evil beasts, but these also could be, for example, like exorcism sort of stuff, right? We honestly like don't know what he's really doing, but my kind of guess, since he is affiliated with Mengzhou and not Mingting, which is where the ISA is from, is that he is a Tomb Raider, right? And one of the reasons why I kind of came to that conclusion is because Jinren, which is part of his like quote over here, into elusive depths, the loner treads on, you kind of see that over here. Jinren, right? Jinren is such a weird word because Jin is like a word you would use to describe today, right? Like today is Jingtian in Chinese. So Jinren means like today's people or like modern people. And I thought maybe, for example, it could mean like the modern people exploring ancient ruins or something. And the reason why is the case, you can kind of see the background, right? What's in the background? It looks like this ancient architecture. And we know from Look that the court of Cervantes built an ancient city underneath Mengzhou. And so far, no other character except for Jingren has talked about that, right? So he may be like a tomb raider into these like ancient, like kind of like areas. And Jingren is kind of like into elusive depths, is like this idea that he's diving into these ruins like a tomb raider, right? The other thing is the loner, so kind of like the loner treads on is pretty obviously a reference to Wuxia, the lone wanderer. If you read Wuxia, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And this was something that also appeared in Choyun's story. So they could both, for example, be ex-ISA members. Anyway, that's Jingren. We're gonna move on to Qingshao. And Qingshao is really interesting. If you like wuxia or cultivation slop, you will love this character because they are like the heavenly sword or like celestial sword. You know what I'm talking about, right? If you read those novels, you know what I'm talking about, right? So Qingshao is a name that actually means a clear or pure night sky. And one thing that's really interesting in Chinese is that this phrase is a metaphor for the highest level of heaven. In Western canon, that the equivalent may be, for example, the Empyrean in heaven, but the reason why a clear night sky is reminiscent of the highest level of heaven is because in Chinese culture, the Chinese people believe that heaven is in the sky. That's why, for example, in Chinese, Tian, which means sky and heaven at the same time, is what it is. So when we go beyond that, right? One of the theories I have for Qingshao is that, as I said before, I am using tons of Wuthering story to kind of inform my approach. And as soon as I saw this character, I was like, yeah, I think I know who this person is, because I think in Wuthering story, she actually meets Qingshao, right? So one of Wuthering stories, I think it's a fourth story, actually talks about how she entered a martial arts tournament in Xuanfang. And a lot of these like sect masters and whatever came down to watch that tournament. And in that it says, rumor had it that even a reclusive master from Shanghai had descended to watch, right? And after Wuling basically loses, well, she doesn't really lose, she kind of like froze, basically, a martial arts tournament. This person actually, this mysterious person comes, the voice was cool and clear, Wuling jumped, as she hadn't even heard anyone approach. A white-robed woman sat nearby, a guqing, and guqing is a Chinese instrument. It's like a combination of like a harp and a guitar. That sounds so wrong to say. But for the sake of understanding, it's a combination of a harp and a guitar, okay? So she held a guqing in her arm, so expression serene and detached, nothing like an ordinary martial artist. Boom. What does that look like? That looks like Qingshao, right? So it makes sense that she would be like a sect master or like some sort of like heavenly, like, or like a kind of like martial arts leader within mountain in Shuangfang, because in her description, she already says, for example, celestial sword guards the clouded pass. I've written that over here. And celestial in Chinese culture, of course, means heavenly or divine. So the heavenly or celestial sword is kind of like in cultivation slot novels, the blade of the heavens, or Tianzhen, right? Because Zhen is a Chinese sword. And they're kind of like mythical godlike weapons, especially, which is something which especially makes sense because you see like she has like a cloud sword almost, right? And besides that, within her quote, you can also see she's guarding the clouded pass. I think the clouded pass is Shuangfang, because you can see that Shuangfang already is a city that is floating and amidst the clouds. So it kind of makes sense that she's from there. She's also like a martial artist from there, okay? And the final character that everyone is probably anticipating, Sin, right? So Sin is really simple. A lot of people kind of like saw her name was like, what the hell, it's just one character? But it's just one character, right? Because Sin or Sin, like it like Kuro likes to spells like Sin or like as like HS. Like it's the same with like Jinsi, right? Like Jinsi is spelled HS, but like it just seems wrong as a Chinese person, but whatever, right? So Sin means the heart. And one of the things we know is that since all the seven sentinels of Panglong are based on the seven mansions of the Azure Dragon, Sin is one of the seven sentinels of the Azure Dragon, right? And we're going to talk about it in the next slide, so don't worry if you don't know what I'm saying. But since Sin is the heart, it is the core and basically the emotional controller of the body of these like this like grander beast, which again, sorry, I'll show you on the next slide. Don't worry about it just yet. Okay, so with Sin, since we have known for a pretty long time from Wuling's bronze mirror and other evidence that Sin is most likely a fox spirit, it's super obvious now that we've actually seen her that she is based on Chinese fox spirits, or Hulijing. And Hulijing are basically the progenitors of fox spirits in a lot of Asian culture. So if you, for example, know, like, you know, these fox spirits in Japanese and Korean culture, most likely they came from Chinese legend. And this whole kind of like idea across Asian culture, like fox spirits being able to shapeshift, surprise, surprise, came from the Chinese Hulijing. So a lot of you guys may be wondering that why the hell can a sentinel for the first time just appear as a human and stuff like this? It's because Hulijing can shapeshift, right? So it actually makes an awful lot of sense why we haven't seen Jue or Imperator or whatever take on human forms, but Sin is the first one we see because she is based on a fox spirit that can shapeshift, right? So one thing I found that's really interesting is because like is that kind of like this whole idea of fox spirits in Asian culture is like always dominated by this kind of idea that they turn into hot women and then they seduce men and shit like that. But if you actually look at kind of like Chinese legend, Hu Li Jing are actually gender neutral, right? They don't have a gender. So it's kind of like how if you know like Norse mythology, Loki can like shapeshift into like a girl or a guy. Like it's the same thing, right? So there's a lot of like recorded legends in Chinese culture where a Hu Li Jing doesn't just transform to like a hot woman, like a courtesan, but also like a hot dude, right? Which is usually kind of like a scholar, kind of like hot scholar-like figure, because the end goal of a Hu Li Jing is just to get close and seduce her target, right? And also she'll probably eat you alive afterwards. So gotta be careful. Okay. But anyway, besides just her appearance and the fact she is pretty obviously based on fox spirits, one thing I find really interesting is her quote, because her quote actually says, if you just see over here, clear moonlight drapes the lonely keep, right? And it's written over here. I didn't make it big for some reason, I forgot. But anyway, I actually added two translations over here because there's a lot of different ways you can kind of translate this phrase. But the way I see it is that since she is the sentinel and ruler of Mengzhou, basically, it's probably that Mengzhou or Xuanfang or like both of them symbolize a kind of isolation or heavy responsibility or even a perseverance of humanity. And the reason why I think that is because whenever a isolated keep or like moonlight over this kind of keep is used within Chinese culture, like for example this poem, it usually symbolizes a very heavy responsibility, right? So Liangzhou Song is a poem by the rather famous Tang Dynasty poet Wang Zihuang, right? And you can kind of see here, there's like two lines I extracted from that. The Yellow River flows far up into white clouds. A single isolated keep sits amidst 10,000-foot mountains. And this was a poem that was talking about basically a border fortress on the edge of, well, the Chinese border, right? And the meaning of really this poem is this isolated keep. And this is like the exact same wording as like, the one that Sin uses in her quote, is this kind of like border fortress which bears an immense responsibility for the safety of the nation. And the fact that this poem in particular also references how to keep amidst like 10,000-foot mountains, and we saw like, for example, Shanfang, it's a floating city, amidst mountains literally, made me just instantly think about this poem, right? And this is also evidenced by the fact that Kuro really loves Tang Dynasty poetry. Well, to be honest, Chinese, like Tang Dynasty poetry is like the most famous dynasty for Chinese poetry, right? But they really love Tang Dynasty poetry. They've referred to it a lot of times, such as with Zhou Yun. So it's not really actually kind of a surprise that maybe her quote is actually based on Liangzhou Song by Wang Zihuang. Anyway, so this is the 7 mansions of the Azure Dragon. So if you guys didn't know, the 7 Sentinels of Fanglong are based on the 7 mansions of the Azure Dragon. And if you don't know what mansions are, basically, TLDR, the Chinese calendar is based on 28 mansions, 1 mansion for each of the 28 days the moon takes to circumference, kind of like circle around the earth, right? So Huanglong is based on a certain sector, the sector of the Azure Dragon, and Sin is, as you can see here, number 5, the heart. So over here, basically, it's kind of like the constellation that represents the emotional controller of the body, or like the heart, basically, right? So final thing we have to go through today is, if you guys didn't know, they actually, like this, I think that like the Japanese guy who made Tekken for some reason, actually was given permission by Kuro to show us gameplay of Yangyang and Suisui. So one last thing I'm going to do today, because I'm tired as hell, I'm sorry guys, is talk about the interesting things that I saw from this kind of like teaser, right? So the only thing I really saw for Yangyang, besides like kind of like the birds like flying around, similar to like kind of like Zerzi. So like if you know with Zerzi, she summons kind of like these cranes that fly around like paintings and stuff like that. It reminded me a lot of that. But what interested me the most is she seems to kind of like call down like this sort of like divine punishment from heaven. Usually that comes in the form of lightning, but she doesn't use that. So I'm interested to see what exactly kind of like she's calling down from the sky. But besides that, I do kind of also think that if you read Yangyang's Forte report, she has overclock before. This does seem like an overclock state, but she doesn't seem evil, right? So I don't think she's like the GA like a lot of the community have been guessing she is, but it's pretty cool regardless. However, I have way more to talk about with Suisui, right? Because with Suisui's moveset and her, especially her ult, one of the first things that I thought about as soon as I saw that is that it looks a lot like this traditional Chinese dance called Feitian, right? Feitian is kind of like this celestial dances. It's a dancing style we often kind of like know about in China, but one of the things that um is really interesting is that the Feitian is not just a dance style that's graceful or floating, but it's also based on the Buddhist aspara, right? These like kind of like heavenly dances in a sense. And what's really interesting when I was kind of like putting two and two together with this trailer is that one of the places that has the most ancient ruins in China is a province called Gansu. And Gansu has a lot of cave paintings like Mogao and also, for example, a lot of tombs, right? And because of its location along the Silk Road, it had a lot of kind of like Buddhist culture injected into the province. And that's why, for example, we have a lot of like these kind of like um cave paintings of Feitian. And also one thing which is really interesting is that one of Gansu is also home to some of the only archaeological evidence of the Hu Liqing, which is, if you guys forgot, Sin, right? Sin is based on the Hu Liqing or the fox spirit. And you can kind of see here some examples. So this is, for example, a Buddhist aspara carved into a cave in Gansu, so the Feitian. And this is also one of the only archaeological paintings we have of the Hu Liqing that is painted in a tomb in Gansu. So that's kind of like obviously really sus because Gansu was, as I said before, a very important place in the Silk Road. It's kind of like the place in the Silk Road where all the different trade routes start to diverge, right? It's kind of like the funnel. And we know that Mengzhou is essentially kind of like this mercantile Taoist paradise or whatever. So I want to see, I'm a little bit sus. I think it might be kind of like maybe based on Gansu, seeing the resonators here, especially since a lot of the identity of a region in Huanglong is oftentimes determined a little bit by the resonators. Like, for example, Changli. Changli is like one of the reasons, like her story is one of the reasons why we know 100% that Mount Firmament is based on Zhejiang, right? So anyway, that's basically all. I am really busy. I do apologize, guys. I am doing this right after work, and I have two videos I do need to still make. So, without any further ado, if you guys enjoyed, please consider subscribing, commenting your thoughts and whatnot, even becoming a channel member. And other than that, I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.